When the attorney read my name instead of my brother's, Claire's engagement ring slipped right off her finger and rolled under the banquet table. Nobody rushed to pick it up. They were too busy realizing the man they'd been cheering for did not own a single brick of the empire he had been bragging about. That moment, the gasp, the silence, the cracks starting to form on every smiling face, did not happen in a courtroom or a living room. It happened in the banquet hall of the Lakeshore Inn, the motel my grandmother built with the same stubbornness she used to raise our family. My parents had decorated the place like it was a coronation. Gold tablecloths, a slideshow of Ethan posing in front of properties he barely managed, and a cake shaped like a motel key. Everyone believed this was Ethan's day. Everyone except me. I sat near the back, quiet, just like they expected. But inside my suitcase, parked neatly beside my chair, were the documents that would turn this entire celebration inside out. The attorney hadn't planned to reveal anything yet. He was supposed to bless Ethan in front of the family, give a stirring speech about legacy and the next generation. My parents had rehearsed it with him, practically smoothing the words onto his tongue. But when he reached the line where Ethan's name was supposed to appear, he paused. And then he said mine. Not Ethan Hayes, Lauren Hayes. Aunts stopped chewing. Uncles lowered their phones. Ethan blinked like someone had shut off the lights. And Claire, well, the ring tumbling across the floor said more than she ever could. But to understand how the room unraveled after that sentence, how the empire in those brochures crumbled in minutes, you need to know everything that happened long before the luncheon, long before the banner with Ethan's face went up, and long before my parents started pretending they knew what Grandma Nora wanted. You need to know how the truth was built. 3 years before that banquet hall fell silent, I got a call I almost ignored. It was a Thursday evening in Denver. I had just wrapped up a 16-hour week of portfolio audits, spreadsheets still open on my second monitor. My phone buzzed with Nora Hayes, and for a second I wondered if she meant to call Ethan instead. That was usually how it went. But when I answered, her voice was clearer than I had heard in months. "Lauren, sweetheart, I need you home this weekend." No apology, no explanation, just certainty. She didn't ask if I was busy or if I could rearrange anything. She simply told me to come. When I pulled into the lakeshore Inn 2 days later, Nora was waiting outside in a thick cardigan, even though it wasn't cold. She didn't hug me first. She pressed a folder into my hand and said, "Walk with me." She led me down to the dock behind the motel, the same one Ethan and I used to jump off as kids, him cannonballing for attention, me quietly checking the water depth first so we wouldn't break a bone. The lake was calm that morning, gray-blue and reflective like polished metal. "I need you to look at these," she said, nodding toward the folder. Inside were statements from the duplexes, the motel accounts, and the maintenance logs. Even before I reached the second page, I saw the bleeding. Expenses labeled urgent repairs with no invoices attached. Cash withdrawals disguised as supply runs. Trips to California written off as property scouting. Thousands missing every month. My stomach tightened. "This is Ethan's handwriting," I said quietly. Nora didn't flinch. She'd already known. "He tells your parents the properties are struggling," she said. "He tells the tenants everything is in progress. But the only thing being maintained is his lifestyle." I felt something hot rise in my chest. Not anger at Ethan. Not yet. Just the sudden awareness that the person who always received applause had been given free rein for far too long. I asked why she hadn't confronted him. Her answer came without hesitation. "Your parents will defend him, and he'll cry, apologize, and promise to do better. But promises don't hold up buildings, Lauren." She tapped the folder once. "Paper does." For the rest of that weekend, she showed me everything. Every rusty pipe, every tenant complaint she'd been handling alone, every bounced check Ethan had quietly covered with motel funds, every corner he'd cut, every lie he'd smoothed over. At night, she sat with me in her tiny office behind the check-in desk and asked questions she already knew I could answer. How would you restructure the accounts? What would you do with the motel wing he keeps avoiding? How long could these properties last without intervention? It felt less like a meeting and more like a transfer of knowledge, a passing of torch she didn't want anyone else to see. On Sunday evening, just before I left, she handed me a second folder. This one was heavier, official, stamped. waiting. "I'm not asking you to take anything," she said. "I'm asking you to protect it." I opened my mouth to argue, but she shook her head. "You don't know what's inside yet," she said softly. "But you will, and when the day comes, I need you to stand straighter than your brother ever has." Her words settled into me like stones. Heavy, necessary, unavoidable. And when I drove back to Denver the next morning, I knew something irreversible had started. Something none of them would see coming until it was already done. I didn't open the second folder until 3 days later. It sat on my kitchen counter like something alive, something waiting. I tried to pretend I was too busy meetings, audits, conference calls, but the truth was simpler. I already knew whatever was inside would change everything, and once I saw it, there would be no going back. On Wednesday night, after a late shift, I finally cracked it open. Inside were documents I recognized from my work, but had never expected to see with my own name printed on them. A fully drafted living trust, a schedule of assets, 8 property listings, signed quitclaim deeds ready for recording, witness lines, notary acknowledgments, everything precise, everything intentional. At the top of the trust document were 9 words that made my breath stop. "Upon my passing, successor trustee shall be Lauren Hayes." Not Ethan, not my parents. Me, I reread the line 3 times before the weight of it landed. Nora hadn't asked me to help. She had already decided to give it all to me. The motel, the duplexes, the land behind the lake she always swore she'd turn into cabins someday. Every piece of the Hayes portfolio. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad while I was standing there absorbing it. "Did you make it home safe?" Nothing more. Not a word about Nora. No curiosity about why she'd called me home. No sign he knew Ethan had turned the family's properties into his personal piggy bank. I set the phone down without replying. The next morning, I called Nora. She answered on the second ring. "Come back this weekend," she said. "The notary will be here Monday morning." When I arrived, she was waiting at the front desk, hair pinned up, wearing the same blue blazer she used for every important meeting since the 90s. She wasn't frail. She wasn't confused. She wasn't being manipulated. She was ready. The notary arrived early, 9:07 a.m., her stamp freshly inked. Nora walked me through each page calmly, thoroughly, making sure I understood the difference between legal ownership and family expectation. Her handwriting was deliberate, her voice steady. "This trust avoids probate," she said. "No public fight, no courtroom, no chance of it being undone." Then she placed her hand over mine. "And no opportunity for your brother to drain another cent." The notary's seal clicked onto the first deed, then the second, then the third. By the time the last document was signed, the morning sun had shifted across the desk, painting long lines of gold across the paperwork. Nora leaned back, exhausted but satisfied. "It's done," she said. "Now don't breathe a word unless someone tries to take what is no longer theirs." That night, she made us dinner, roasted chicken, her favorite, and we talked about everything except the papers in the locked drawer behind her desk. She told me stories I'd never heard. About how she bought the first duplex with a loan she wasn't supposed to qualify for. About how she handled tenants during the recession by feeding them breakfast instead of raising rents. She wasn't building wealth. She was building stability. "People forget that," she said quietly. "Especially people who think they're entitled to it." I didn't ask who she meant. I didn't have to. When I drove back to Denver the next morning, I kept the folder belted into the passenger seat, like it was something fragile, something alive. For the next 2.5 years, nothing appeared different on the surface. Ethan strutted around the properties like they belonged to him. My parents bragged about his dedication. Claire helped him take pictures for social media, captioning them with phrases like "future mogul" and "building our empire." But behind the scenes, every title, every deed, every signature had been quietly, legally, permanently transferred. Every brick, every roof, every tenant, all of it belonged to me. And nobody in that motel banquet hall had the slightest idea. The strange thing about hiding the truth is how easily people convince themselves they already know it. For the next couple of years, my family built Ethan's legend with the same blind enthusiasm people reserve for underdogs and hometown heroes. Every improvement Nora had paid for before her health declined, new siding, repaired stairwells, the updated motel lobby, Ethan took credit for. Every tenant who finally felt heard because I'd quietly emailed the real answers from Denver. He bragged about personally stepping in. He even took a photo next to a freshly repainted doorframe and posted it online with the caption, "Another long day keeping the portfolio alive." He hadn't lifted a paintbrush in his life. But the longer I stayed quiet, the faster his confidence grew. And confident people make sloppy mistakes. The first crack came when a tenant emailed me directly, a woman named Marissa from Unit 3 billion of one of the duplexes. She thanked me for sending plumber invoices so quickly. I hadn't sent anything. I hadn't even known there was an issue. I called the plumber myself. Ethan said the owner approved it, he told me. That word, owner, hit harder than I expected. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. Instead, I drove down the following weekend and walked through the property myself. The plumbing was fine. The real problem was the stack of unpaid repair requests sitting in the manager's office. When I asked about them, the manager sighed. Ethan said the budget's too tight, wants to wait until next year. But the trust account wasn't tight at all. He was. Then came the motel. 2 months before Nora passed, Ethan tried to quietly list the Lakeshore Inn for sale through an agent he'd met at a real estate networking event. He hadn't told my parents, who thought the motel was the heart of the family's identity. He certainly hadn't told me, but the agent emailed him a draft listing agreement. And Ethan, in a hurry, forwarded it to the motel's generic inbox, the one that automatically CC'd me. The listing price was low, embarrassingly low, lower than the land alone was worth. He hadn't done an appraisal. He hadn't checked occupancy history. He hadn't looked at any financials. He just wanted cash. I didn't say a word, not to him, not to my parents, not even to Nora. She was already fading by then, her energy flickering in and out like a bulb at the end of its life. The last time I visited her, she asked if everything was still quiet. "Quiet enough," I said. She squeezed my hand, pupils sharp as ever. "Paper beats promises, Lauren, and you're the only one who understands that." She passed a few weeks later. The funeral was small, mostly family, some old tenants who had stayed loyal for decades, and a few locals who remembered her buying donuts for workers who plowed snow in the winter. Ethan delivered a eulogy full of stories about their special bond. My parents cried. Claire dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I stood at the back, clutching the folder in my purse like something combustible. After the service, Dad pulled me aside. "Stay an extra day. We need to talk about the properties." I already knew what it would be. The meeting, the pressure, the family agreement. They gathered everyone in the motel office, papers spread across the desk. Aunts, uncles, Ethan's friends, the family attorney, though not Nora's, their own. They pushed a waiver across the table toward me. "For clarity," Dad said. "For efficiency," Mom added. "For the family," Ethan smirked. The waiver said I would renounce any interest in the duplexes, the motel, and the land. Ethan would receive them for operational continuity. I slid the paper back. "No!" They froze. Mom's voice cracked. "Sweetheart, this is what Grandma would have wanted." I laughed before I could stop myself. Because I knew exactly what Grandma wanted. My father's face reddened. "Don't make this difficult," he said, the way he used to when I questioned unfairness as a kid. "Think about what your brother has done for this family." I did think about it. I thought about the missing receipts, the unpaid repairs, the attempted motel sale, the years of being told my place was somewhere quiet and out of the way. I pushed back my chair. "I'm not signing anything," I said, "and whatever you believe Grandma wanted, you're wrong." I left them stunned in that cramped office, the hum of the motel vending machine filling the silence as I walked out. For the next few months, they called me dramatic, emotional, ungrateful, selfish. Then they did what people always do when they want to win without facts. They planned a spectacle. A big event, a public announcement, a legacy luncheon. And they fully expected me to sit quietly in the back. What they didn't expect was for all of Grandma's paperwork to already be recorded. Stamped, legal, untouchable. The banquet hall was their celebration. They just didn't know it would become their undoing. The morning of the legacy luncheon felt like the kind of quiet you get before a storm. Not loud, not dramatic, but charged with something you can't quite see yet. I woke early in my Denver apartment, brewed coffee I barely tasted, and packed everything into the same charcoal suitcase I used for business trips. Inside it, beneath a layer of clothes, lay the fireproof folder. Every deed, every trust page, every notarized signature. Scanned copies on a flash drive, multiple printed sets, not because I needed them all, because I knew once the truth came out, my family would try to grab at any angle they could find, and I wasn't giving them a single loose edge to pull. I drove to the airport before sunrise, landed in Seattle by noon, rented a car, and drove the final hour to Cedar Falls. The closer I got, the more familiar everything felt. Pine trees lining the roads, the lake coming into view, the faded motel sign Nora had refused to replace because the old one has character. I parked behind the event hall where the celebration was being set up. I could already hear laughter through the open side doors. Inside, my parents were welcoming guests like royalty. Mom wore pearls and a smile that could crack glass. She greeted tenants, aunts, cousins, old friends, all of them congratulating her as if she had personally built the motel brick by brick. Dad shook hands and told people how proud he was of Ethan, how excited he was for this new era of Hayes' leadership. Then there was Ethan, standing near the stage with Claire gripping his arm like she was anchoring herself to the future she believed she was marrying into. He wore a tailored suit, hair perfectly styled, basking under the attention he assumed he deserved. He didn't look at me as I walked in, which was fine. The look on his face later would be worth the wait. Tyler, my cousin, spotted me first. He weaved through the crowd and met me halfway. "You brought it," he whispered. He meant the folder. He didn't need to specify. I nodded. He exhaled in relief, though his expression carried something heavier, sadness, maybe, or resignation. Tyler had always been quiet, but he saw everything. He'd watched the favoritism since we were kids. He'd seen how Ethan absorbed every advantage while I was told to be patient, be supportive, be smaller. "You ready?" he asked. I wasn't sure anyone could ever be ready for what was about to happen. But I said, yes. The event hall filled quickly. Round tables draped in gold cloth. Centerpieces with fake greenery spray-painted silver. A slideshow looping photos of Ethan standing in front of properties he didn't own. The mood was celebratory, almost smug. They thought today would crown him. Mom took her place at the microphone first. "Thank you all for being here to honor Nora's legacy," she began. "Today, we celebrate her life's work and pass the torch to the next generation." Ethan shifted proudly beside her. Then she nodded to the attorney, Mr. Roland Pierce, who stepped up to deliver the formal reading. He looked uncomfortable already. He hadn't been part of Nora's trust process. He was the family's attorney, not hers. He shuffled his papers with a nervous energy I recognized immediately. He'd reviewed something that did not match what he'd been told. He cleared his throat. "As per the recorded documentation," the room went still. "The legal successor and sole trustee of the Hayes properties is," he paused. Eyes flicked to mine. Ethan's smile froze. "Lauren Hayes." The silence snapped like a wire pulled too tight. A fork dropped. A glass clinked. Claire's hand flew to her chest, and then her engagement ring slipped from her finger. It hit the table, bounced once, and rolled underneath the linen. Nobody moved to get it. Everyone was staring at me, or at Ethan, whose face drained from triumph to pure disbelief. "What?" he croaked. No, that's wrong." Mr. Pierce lifted another sheet. "These documents were correctly filed with the county recorder's office, signed by Nora Hayes, witnessed, notarized, recorded 3 years ago." Dad surged forward. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," the attorney replied gently. "Legally, everything belongs to Lauren." The room erupted into shocked whispers. Claire took a step away from Ethan, her face pale. Mom stood frozen like she had been slapped. Dad opened and closed his mouth, searching for an argument that didn't exist. And Ethan, my brother who had curated his identity around being the chosen one, looked at me with the kind of betrayal people feel when a mirror finally shows them who they really are. "This is impossible," he muttered. "No," I said quietly from my seat. "It isn't. Because when you build your life on someone else's work, someone else's trust, someone else's silence, you forget that silence is a choice. And I was done choosing it. If shock had a sound, It would have been the room that afternoon. Chairs creaking, someone's breath hitching, glass stems rattling against tabletops. My parents stood frozen at the front of the hall, staring at the attorney like he had recited someone else's obituary. But Ethan reacted exactly how I knew he would. He lunged toward Mr. Pierce, snatching the stack of documents out of his hands so violently that a few pages fluttered to the floor. "These are fake," he snapped. His voice cracked. "My grandmother would never cut me out. She trusted me. Everyone knows that." He whipped through the pages like he expected the ink to peel off. But every signature, every notary stamp, every recording date stared back at him in clear, clean print. Mr. Pierce simply adjusted his glasses. "Those documents were recorded legally and properly," he said calmly. "Your grandmother completed the trust with full capacity. She filed it herself. We checked it against county systems this morning to verify." Ethan shook his head, eyes wild. "You're lying. Someone's lying." And for a second, just a second, I saw the boy he used to be, terrified of losing something he believed he already owned. Mom was the next to crack. She stumbled toward me, mascara already running. "Lauren, sweetheart, you don't understand. Ethan has spent years helping with these properties. We thought the inheritance would reflect that." "Reflect what?" I asked quietly. "The missing maintenance funds, the unpaid bills, the motel he tried to sell without telling anyone." Her breath caught like I'd slapped her. "You're making him sound irresponsible," she whispered. "He is irresponsible," I replied. Dad stepped in front of her, chest puffed with wounded pride. "You knew about this and said nothing. You let us plan this. You let us embarrass ourselves." I met his eyes, unblinking. "You tried to force me to sign away what wasn't yours to give. You asked me to renounce something I already owned. What exactly did you expect me to do? Smile and play along?" For a moment, I thought Dad might argue. But then his gaze drifted toward the fallen engagement ring glinting under the tablecloth. Even he couldn't ignore symbolism that blunt. The whispers around the room grew louder. "Lauren owns all of it. How long has this been in place? Did Ethan really not know?" 3 years recorded. 3. Ethan dropped the papers onto the table like they were hot. "This is a setup," he said, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "You manipulated her. You took advantage of her when she was sick." A new voice cut through the room. "I was there." Every head turned. Tyler, my quiet cousin, stepped forward. He spoke in a steady tone that didn't waver. "I drove Aunt Nora to the notary myself. She was clear, alert, and knew exactly what she was signing. She even joked that she should have done it sooner." Ethan stared at him like he had been betrayed by gravity. "You knew," he whispered. Tyler nodded. "She asked me to stay quiet until she passed. I kept my promise." The collapse of Ethan's expression was almost physical, something folding inward, bitter and broken. Claire suddenly spoke up from behind him, her voice brittle. "You told me you were inheriting everything," she said. "You said the properties were practically yours already. You said we'd live off the motel income." He turned to her, reaching for her hand. "Claire, I thought—" She pulled away before he could touch her. Her eyes dropped to the engagement ring on the floor. "You don't own anything," she whispered. "Not even the truth." She lifted her purse from her chair and walked out of the banquet hall without another word. Ethan watched her go, chest heaving, fingers curled helplessly at his sides. Mom let out a choked sob. Dad sank into a chair like someone had drained the bones from his body. For the first time in my life, I saw my family without the illusion, without the hierarchy, the favoritism, the stories they repeated so often they believed them. I saw them exactly as they were, and they saw me, not the quiet daughter, not the background character, not the one who left and stayed gone. They saw the person Nora had trusted, the person they had underestimated. Ethan's voice came out small. "What do you want, Lauren?" Everyone waited. I kept my tone even. "I don't want your apology," I said. "I don't want your approval, and I'm not here to negotiate." I closed the fireproof folder and slipped it back into my suitcase. "What I want," I continued, "is for you to understand that Grandma's legacy doesn't belong to the loudest voice or the most entitled child. It belongs to whoever is willing to protect it." I lifted my suitcase. And that was never you. When I walked out of the banquet hall that afternoon, the air outside felt colder than the lake breeze. Not because of the weather, because of the finality. Behind me, the celebration had dissolved into a low hum of confusion, shame, and whispered speculation. The family who once treated Ethan like a future king now avoided meeting his eyes. Mom was still crying when I left. Dad sat slumped in a chair like someone had knocked the wind out of him. But nobody followed me out. Not one person. I loaded my suitcase into the rental car, closed the trunk, and stood there for a moment, hands on the metal, grounding myself. It was over. Not just the event, not just the lie. A whole era of expectation had finally snapped. The drive back to my hotel was quiet. I didn't play music. I just let the silence fill the space, real silence, the sort that isn't waiting for someone to interrupt it. The next morning, I packed early and left town without telling anyone. No long speeches, no dramatic exits, just a simple checkout at the front desk and a nod to the clerk who had known Nora for years. 3 months passed. 3 months in which everything shifted faster than anyone expected. Ethan's name disappeared from every vendor account and every deposit record. The tenants received updated instructions with my name, not his. Most didn't even blink. They just wanted repairs done on time, and I made sure they were. Within weeks, the numbers stabilized. The duplexes brought in steady income. The motel occupancy rose. For the first time in years, the financials looked like something Nora would have been proud of. But the fallout hit my family harder than anything else. The IRS audit arrived first. Ethan had been writing off personal trips as business expenses for years, and now the penalties were higher than anything the motel had ever brought in. He hired a lawyer he couldn't afford, lost the case anyway, and wound up on a long-term payment plan that would follow him around like a shadow. Claire mailed back the engagement ring without a note. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a pizza shop and got a job selling used SUVs off the highway. Tyler said he hardly spoke to anyone anymore. Mom and Dad didn't fare much better. Without Ethan's projected windfall, without the future they had counted on, they were forced to make cuts they never imagined making. They sold the house, the big one with the lake view. Then the boat. Then the jet skis. Mom stopped buying designer dresses and started working part-time at a local boutique. Dad took early retirement because stress was eating through him like rust. They called me twice. Once, Dad left a message saying the family shouldn't fall apart over misunderstandings. The second time, Mom asked if I would come home for Christmas. I deleted both messages the same day. I didn't block them out of anger. I did it because for the first time in my life, I understood the difference between forgiveness and access. You can forgive people without reopening a door that they walked through like owners. As for me, Denver felt new again. The rental income covered my mortgage. I hired a professional property management firm run by 2 women who didn't waste time or money. Tenants got repairs within days. Vacancies dropped. I bought a small second property. Nothing big, just something that felt wholly mine. And every month, the numbers landed in my account exactly the way Nora intended. Clean, steady, quiet. On some nights, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city, thinking about the girl I used to be. The girl who watched her brother get praised for simply showing up. The girl who learned that silence was easier than confrontation. The girl who left because staying meant shrinking. But that girl didn't inherit anything. The woman I became did. Nora once told me that paper beats promises always. But what she didn't say, what I had to learn myself, is that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop waiting for people to recognize your worth. Sometimes the family you protect isn't the one you're born into. It's the one you build with your own hands, your own work, your own peace. I still have the fireproof folder on the top shelf of my closet. I don't open it much. I don't need to. The motel, the duplexes, the land, they're safe. And so am I.